Hello, everyone. This is the third, I think it's the third video I've done on television. So, before I get to that though, this is a very cool mug. So this is a mug that a lot of British people would relate to. Dunkonomics, all about dunking biscuits. It's got instructions on how to dunk a biscuit, and it's got which biscuits have got certain kind of the crunch factor, and how long you need to do it for, what percentage they start to dissolve. And you've got different types of biscuits there, like Nice and the Bourbon, and then there's some on the other side as well, like your jammy Dodger and your malted milk. Malted milk biscuits are amazing. So yeah, this is a very cool mug that was given to me by my adopted sister Susan. Hello Susan, if you're watching this, you probably aren't. So, I wanted to talk about Stranger Things. So, Stranger Things has just finished. I've just finished watching it. And it's just phenomenal. It's blown me away every time. And I thought, if I'm going to do the occasional video about television, I have to do something on Stranger Things. So, obviously, the other two are a little bit more obscure. Like, the first one I did, the one on Tales from the Loop. I don't know how many people even watched that, but that blew me away. And I wanted to talk about Tales from the Loop, and obviously it was bouncing off the books as well, so I thought, you know, really fit the channel. But I really wanted to do my 10 favourite Twilight Zone episodes, which I did, and Twilight Zone means a lot to me. But actually, if you think about the stuff I've been putting up on this channel, it's not a massive surprise that I love Stranger Things, because it's such a great blend of all the things I like. Which brings me to my first point. So, what I want to do is do a video on the 10 things I love about Stranger Things. So, thing number one, factor number one, the concept. So the concept of the show is this lovely blend of science fiction, fantasy and horror. It gets more horrific as it goes along. The last season was much more horrific than the others, but there's been a strong thread all the way through it of that. I'm trying to do this video, by the way, without too many spoilers, so that hopefully it will appeal to the people that have been watching and go, yeah, I agree with you, or I don't agree with you. And for anyone who's not watched it yet, you're really missing out. But if you haven't watched it yet, then it gives you a flavour of what it is. So, right from the beginning, the fact that there was this sort of huge sort of demonic creature that was being revealed through the first season, through this kidnapping and this sort of literal underworld. Clearly that's a horrific thing, but mixed in with that, you've got Eleven's story, which is very science fiction-y and all about experiments on children and stuff, and in general you've got that sort of fantasy element running through it. So those kind of things are just like, it's just got a really nice perfect blend of all those things. And to be fair, what's really good, the way that it ramped up this last season, which I will talk about later in a bigger way, but that is part of that blend that didn't stay still, which is another point actually about it not staying still. But yeah, I just love the fact that it had these different aspects to it that were moving around all the time. So the general concept was amazing right from the beginning. And the fact that there was this sort of slow reveal in all four series. There was a slow reveal to the final sort of truth of what that series was about. So that was awesome. The second point, the characters. So the characters are so well crafted. So it's not just the kids. There's a lot of child characters in the show, which I think was the initial appeal, because I think it was quite unusual to have a show like that based around children with such strong characters and such good actors as well. But it's also the adults that are in it as well. So principally the main police chief, Hopper, and Will's mum and Jonathan's mum, played by Winona Ryder. So both of those, Joyce, she played, both those adult characters were at the centre of everything as well. But such rounded characters. There was nobody in the show that had, certainly none of the main characters that had just sort of like a stereotypical kind of function. They all of them were much more than a function. All of them, you really felt like you knew them in a three-dimensional way. And I think that's fantastic. And part of that is the character arc. So a lot of them changed through the series as well. And as they went through these ordeals, they learned a lot about themselves, and they learned a lot about their relationships. They learned a lot about parenthood for some of them, and for the younger characters, a lot about relationships in general, and about love, and about loyalty and trust, and stepping outside your comfort zone, and stepping out and being brave, and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of that going on. So the character arcs were really interesting as well. I love the fact that with these characters, there was always this multi-angle focus, so it wasn't just like those four people, like Dustin, Lucas, Will, and Mike, just those four being the focus. There was always lots going on, and they added to it each season. So, I mean, in the first season, a lot of it was the audience and those four finding out what Eleven's story was, which is not a spoiler because that's part of the fun of it, discovering all that. But each time they've kind of added to the show, and they've added characters, and they've added more layers to it, which I think is awesome. The third thing is the dialogue. So those characters would not work without the dialogue. This kind of reminds me a little bit of the one I did on Farscape. Actually, this means it's the fourth one I've done on TV, because I remember talking about Crichton and how his dialogue was so brilliant. But yeah, the dialogue is, again, makes these characters come to life, but sometimes it's funny, it's always heartwarming, it's very real, and it's very true to whatever that character is. So if it's one of the young characters and they are particularly shy or cowardly, or they've got this sort of wild imagination. I mean, I think right early on you get a sense that Dustin really enjoys the possibility of the fantasy elements, and he's all excited by the scariness of it. And I think Lucas seems to be a little bit more freaked out by it. And those kind of things, they are the dialogue is very separated to the right people in the right way, and it works really well. And I think that's an absolute tribute to the writing. So it's not just about the plot and how that develops, but the actual writing of the dialogue is brilliantly done as well. And there are certain moments in the show that really get you, and that's because the show has been that immersive, and the characters mean so much, and their relationships mean so much to the audience. So, fourth thing I wanted to talk about was I love the fact that all the way through it, but especially in the last season, there's this use of small town suspicion, a lack of trust among the community, and that idea, like with the shelter in the Twilight Zone and all those kind of things that I mentioned in a different video, where the actual happy-go-lucky nature of being neighbourly can fall apart once fear comes into it, and once people start worrying about what's happening around them, then they can turn on each other quite quickly. And that kind of stuff is really explored well. And throughout all of that, in all of the seasons, the heroes are isolated in a really realistic way. And I like that, because it means that they obviously are really up against it, and the stakes are higher because they haven't got the backing of the right people. They haven't got the backing of the authorities or anybody else, really. So that's another thing I love about the show. The fifth comment is probably the most obvious one. It's probably what people talked about the most when it first appeared on the screens, and that's the nostalgia factor. So I am over 50 now, which means I am an 80s kid. I was a teenager through the 80s, and all of those references absolutely hit the nail on the head for me. I played D&D when I was young, and play it now as well. But all those songs mean something, and there's the soundtrack running through it. It's got loads of nods to different big songs from the 80s, and for me personally as well, it was a big thing when they included Just Another Day by Oingo Boingo in the second season. But there's lots of moments like that, and it just takes you back. and the BMXs and the references to some of the films. There's just tons, and actually the thing with the nostalgia is not just the references and the dialogue or the soundtrack, but the whole feel of it is a nod and kind of like a love letter to 80s science fiction, horror, family films. Really, I mean, it does get pretty hectic in the last season, but a lot of it's that sort of PG age target, which is what it's paying tribute to as well. So I think that's really, really good. And you could imagine it might have been directed by Steven Spielberg, or it could have been directed by Robert Zemeckis or Richard Donner or something like that. And I think that's part of the charm of it. So all those things that I've already said is true, but that nostalgia adds that really important layer, which makes it a lot more charming and a lot more charismatic, and makes it a bit different. And I don't know if we're going to get a load of Stranger Things copycats now, but so that sometimes happens. But it's the first thing. That's the first thing I can think of. I don't think there is any yet. But that absolute recreation of the spirit of the 80s like that is quite special and awesome. So that's the fifth comment I wanted to make. Sixth thing I love about the show is the way it builds each season and the way it changes each season. So each season is kind of a separate story, while also being something built from the previous season. So the actual nuts and bolts, the actual physical activity of the villains in each season changes, but the overall arc of what's happening is consistent, and obviously the characters are consistently the same, because some characters are added, but the main characters and anyone that has been in it before, they stay true to what they've been like while changing through a natural evolution of what's been happening to them. So I think it's really good that it builds, because I think most people would probably say that the third season is the weakest one, but it's such a high bar that it's not a particularly big point to make, because the first and second season is ridiculous. So if the third season was really good but not quite as must see, if you like, you couldn't wait to see it again, you might leave it a few days and that kind of thing. If it was kind of like that, then it still doesn't change the fact that it was building each time, and they were always pushing themselves. The writers, the Duffer Brothers, who wrote and directed a lot of it and kind of came up with the concept, they're always thinking we need to push this plot further and make it bigger, more epic, build on what's happened before. And you can really see that. And like in the fourth season, which I'll get to in the last point, that was crazy what they were doing there. So in general, just the general point, I love the fact that they've built the series up as they went along and made it really... they didn't repeat themselves. And they could have done, because there's something repetitive about it, but there's always enough there that it wasn't repetitive, but it could have been, because the general point is consistent. So that brings me on to the seventh point, which is which I really love, the unpredictability. You didn't know how each series was going to end, and you felt like everybody was in danger, and you felt like the peril was really on screen, and that anyone was vulnerable, which I think is very clever, considering one, a lot of them are children, and two, you'd invested so much emotion and affection for these characters that it's quite a brave thing to do, to kill them off if you were going to, and you know that the consequences would be devastating if there was some characters that died and that kind of thing. But they used that, and that unpredictability was brilliant. And the way that some of the reveals came through the series was ways in which usually you went, well, yeah, of course, why didn't I see that coming? But it was just very clever the way that... and then you end up trying to second guess it in the fourth series, and it's sort of... then it still surprises you, because it does it in a different kind of way. So the unpredictability is a big thing, because if it was predictable, then I think... it would kill some of that peril, some of the thrill of it, some of the ways that you couldn't wait to see what happens next. You'd be like, oh, I know what's going to happen next. But they did enough surprises to make you think, well, I don't actually know what's going to happen, you know? So that was number 7. Number 8, the consistency. So as I've been saying about the things that I like about it, all of these things are true about all 4 seasons. So even though I've already said I think the 3rd season slips a little bit, I think the effects are incredible. The acting is amazing by everybody. The characters are so well drawn. Even when they're adding new characters, they're brilliant characters. And the overall arch, you never get a point where you think, well, that was a bit stupid, or that doesn't make sense. And everything consistently makes sense in the show. And the way that, Eleven's story goes up and down all the time, and there's loads of things that happen to 11, both in school and in her relationships and in the lab and in the flashbacks. All these different things all make perfect sense, and it all builds on the story. So I think the consistency is a really big thing, because so many shows, you kind of, I think you can definitely level this at the latest Star Trek shows, because I do like the latest Star Trek shows, but there are sometimes you just go, all right, okay, I'll run with that, because it's not quite consistent, or it's not, or it's, you just don't know where that came from, or it's a little bit of a convenient thing to write or something like that, and you just go, yeah, I'll go with that, because ultimately, to be fair, Star Trek's always been like that. So I mean, when people are slagging off the latest Star Treks, I do think that the original Star Trek has got some dodgy episodes in it. Star Trek's always had faults, but certainly that consistency thing can be a problem, where you just think, all right, I'll go with that. But there's no moment in Stranger Things where you just go in, yeah, I'll go with that, because literally they have meticulously planned what they're doing, and it all makes sense, and it all flows really well. So there's no sense of where did that come from, and they'll sort of they'll bring things back enough so that you haven't forgotten about it. Because some things you see, it's been so long since a particular plot line's happened that it feels a little bit like a Deus Ex Machina sort of situation, where they just sort of produce something out of nowhere. But there's always that multi-angle focus where you've got different things happening at the same time, which makes it always relevant. So what's happening, even though, because in the 4th series, which I'll get to at the end, you don't always know where it's leading, where these separate plot lines are leading, but they keep bringing them in so that you know and are always aware how important those plot lines are. So I think that's very clever. So the 9th point, which again a lot of people talked about, and I think it's one of those things you can talk about because it's like an Easter eggy thing, and that's the cameos and the casting. So great thing for people my age who love all that stuff and grew up on science fiction and fantasy and horror when they were kids in the 80s, and you've got these people coming back again. So obviously a very clear example of that is Winona Ryder having such a major part in it, and straight away it was so great to see her getting such a brilliant role, and she's so brilliant in it. So that was really cool for people my age, but also having Paul Reiser having a big part in it, that was awesome as well. But there's without any spoilers, there's a great addition in season 2 of a guy who was really famous. I mean, he had an even bigger role later on in his life, but he was really big in the 80s thanks to the Goonies, and he appears in the 2nd series, and that's fantastic, and they work with that so well, and he's a brilliant character. And then also, just off the bat, there's a great cameo, really, really good cameo. I couldn't believe it. I heard his voice before he turned around, and I was like, that's not him, is it? And then he turned around and thought, that is brilliant. An absolute icon from 80s horror makes a cameo in the 4th series, and it's just beautifully done. And those kind of things are extra little things that we can enjoy that add to everything else that we're loving about it. So yeah, and the casting itself, just sort of, it's not just the cameos, but the casting, the acting is so good, and to have that many child characters in it, there's a risk clearly that the acting is going to be dodgy, but these are very, very good child actors. And is it Millie Bobby Brown, that plays 11? She is a fantastic actress. There's so much relies on, she's got such a massive weight of the drama that if it doesn't work, if she's not convincing, it'll all fall apart. And she does a fantastic job. And they all do. They absolutely all do. The acting is just phenomenal. I can't think of any weak character, acting wise, and that includes all the small characters. So all 4 series, the acting is absolutely phenomenal. So that's a huge thing for me, certainly, and something that people might take for granted. So yeah, the acting really is top notch. So the last thing I wanted to mention is that last season. So I've just finished watching it. We watched it very quickly. Once we'd finished watching, we basically caught up with what we could of Better Call Saul. It's not quite finished yet. So there was this gap, and we were like, let's watch Stranger Things now, because I was scared of getting spoilers, and it had been on for a little bit. So we just pretty much binge watched it every day. We've been watching as much as we could without needing a rest. And like the last series, every episode is really long. So the shortest one's like an hour and 6 minutes, but the longest one is the last episode, which is 2.5 hours. So that's like a long film. But they're all like films. A lot of them are like an hour and 20 or an hour and a half. And it doesn't feel like that at all. But it's because there's so much going on and there's so many different layers to the plot. And they could have easily spread that off into 2 seasons, but they didn't. They were brave about it. They thought, we're not gonna waste time doing that, even though we've got all this material. We could, but we're just gonna make it a really good season. And I think that was really good. So, you know, like I was saying, in the 6th point, they take risks, and I think the 4th season was a big risk. I mean, it's paid off because everyone loves it, but the risk could have been that people are thinking, well, why are the episodes that long? And if you weren't involved in it, you weren't kind of getting it, then you might be thinking, this is crazy, there's too much padding. But none of it is padding. That's the point. None of it is padding. There is no padding in the 4th season, and the 4th season is really long. There's no padding. So that is a hell of an achievement. So yeah, those are 10 reasons why I love Stranger Things. Let me know whether you've been watching it. If you've not been watching it, then this won't mean anything to you, so don't worry about commenting. But if you have been watching it, tell me what you like about the show. I've probably hit some of the things you like, but I just absolutely blown away by this show, and it's lovely when these things happen. So like I was saying, this is actually the 4th TV video I've done, isn't it? And I'll do it now and again, but this really is quite something special. I don't really. I'll tell you what. I've heard there's going to be a 5th season, which will be the last season apparently. And when I heard that, and now especially now I've seen that last episode, I'm thinking, I really hope it's as good as the others, because I don't want it to fall in its quality. But I thought that after the 1st series, when they said that they weren't going to produce another one, but they were going to produce another one, I thought, how can they do that? That's crazy. That's such a brilliant ending. This is a terrible idea. They're going to ruin what's happened before, blah, blah, blah. And it was fantastic, and all built around Dustin, and everyone loves Dustin, so that was cool. But, you know, that 1st series, it was such a surprise, and it was, you know, and no one knew that Stranger Things was going to be a thing, that it was going to be such a success and everyone would love it. So after that series, we're like, oh, what, there's going to be more of it? Is it going to be as good? You know, so I feel like that about this 4th one, but ultimately I thought about that before, and they've produced great material. So I'm sure this 5th one will be fantastic, but we'll see. But unbelievable, Stranger Things. If you haven't seen this yet, and you've heard everyone talk about it, and you like especially 80s fantasy, horror, science fiction stuff, but if you like new stuff, because clearly there's going to be lots of things that are parallel to now anyway, and there are moments that are very modern, but give it a go, see what you think. That's it for me. But yeah, what a show.